Good evening. I think it's 6:30, so we'll make a start. Welcome to the executive meeting, members of the executive in particular, and guests, particularly those online. How many people we got online? Six. Okay, fine. So we'll make a start with apologies for absence, please, Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Skipper sent his apologies.
Okay, fine. Colleagues, are we happy to confirm and for me to sign the minutes of the last meeting? Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest that anybody wants to make at this point? No? Okay, good. Are there any questions from members, first of all, from members of the executive? No? Guests in the chamber? No? And people online? Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. My internet connection failed at exactly the wrong moment, so I don't know exactly where you've got to. So could you tell me which item on the agenda you're on, please?
Yes, we're on item 4, questions by members.
Okay, that's fine. Mine relate to the other matters that are coming up, so I will hold my counsel.
Okay, fine. Is there anybody else online who wishes to raise anything? That'll be a no. Okay, we will move on then to item 5, which is the complaints procedure. Councillor McIntyre, I believe you're going to deal with that for us.
Right. Oh, I don't understand. Right. I'm too short anyway. Right, there are two policies being presented to this executive today: the complaints and compliments policy, and the unreasonably persistent and vexatious communication and complaints policy. With regards to the first one, the complaints and compliments policy, this was originally implemented in 2011 and has been revised twice since that time, the last revision during 2021. The aim of the policy remains to make it easy for residents to voice dissatisfaction or satisfaction with the council. This is to enable the council to learn and improve our services and offering to residents and businesses of the borough. The key changes within this revision are, importantly, to clarify the scope of the policy to avoid confusion with issues involving freedom of information, GDPR or General Data Protection Regulation, subject access requests and data protection, which are separate from the complaints and compliments process. To improve the service with an impartial view being introduced at stage 3 of the complaints process, this now means that a senior officer who is unconnected with the service being the object of the complaint will undertake a review of both the original issue raised, the response from the service, and of any action being proposed or taken. This officer should also review the complaint from any likely perspective that the Ombudsman for local government and the social care may consider it, should the complaint progress to that stage. And lastly, to ensure that the policy is updated following changes to job titles within the senior management structure of the council. The second policy is the unreasonably persistent and vexatious communication and complaints policy. This was introduced and therefore last amended in 2019. The key changes to this policy are to clarify and improve upon the definition of this complaint type and to introduce a more proactive approach to working with our residents, to negate, wherever possible, the need for the implementation of any restrictions to the residents' interactions with council officers. And again, the revisions have included updates to job titles with senior management. Full details are in the 2 policy papers and we're available to answer any questions if need be.
Thank you. That's very comprehensive. Are there any questions from the executive? No. And from people online? Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Leader. So I have a couple of queries. So there is a complaint which is accepted by social media And that to me throws out concern. Social media means a lot of things, and I'm not quite sure that we would always be cognitive of what constituted a complaint on social media. So I wonder if the portfolio holder could update me on that. The other thing as well, which I'm surprised about, is that there is no reference there about how our responses will be made. So when we get to a stage 3 complaint, it talks about in writing, but for a stage 1 and stage 2 complaint, there's nothing in that document about how we should respond to it. And the other thing as well that surprised me is that we're saying that all of them should be responded to within 10 days. Now, much as I'm really keen to make sure that we respond in a very timely manner to our residents, I think a stage 3 complaint, to have the expectation that we would respond to a stage 3 complaint in 10 days may well be putting our officers under a great deal of pressure, because invariably by the time it gets to a stage 3 complaint, it's been through obviously 2 previous stages. Management would have been involved at the second stage, and so the stage 3 complaint is going to need to look for the identification of somebody to deal with it, with the change that it's going to be dealt with by somebody within a different department. So I wonder, please, if you could come back to me on that one. And the other thing that surprises me is when we talk about vexatious complaint, we make reference to that about the fact that they can liaise with their local councillor. But within the complaints procedure prior to that, there is no reference to pointing our residents in the direction of the councillors to support them with that. So that again is something that surprises me. And the other thing as well is that the complaints and compliments procedure only comes to the Performance and Finance and Scrutiny Committee annually. Now, the other thing as well with that is I'm surprised that the portfolio holder is taking the way in which that's presented at the Performance and Finance meeting annually as being the right way to do it. So I don't know if they've had the opportunity to go back and look through the way in which those complaints are presented, but I'm surprised that it's gone through without a little bit more rigor. The other thing as well that surprises me is that we've got nothing here about a central register of complaints. And that's actually very important when we talk about the vexatious complaints, because on the vexatious complaints, one of the things that makes a resident potentially vexatious is to take the same matter to multiple officers across multiple departments with a very similar complaint. And yet we're not in any way talking about a central register of complaints that come into the council. So sorry, there's an awful lot there. So just to reiterate, it's how we're going to deal with complaints by social media. How will the responses be made? Is it reasonable to have a 10-day response level for all 3 stages of complaint? The lack of involvement with members or the portfolio holder within the complaints procedure, only with the vexatious complainant, and the central register, if I haven't registered that already. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions, Councillor Wheeler, and all noted and good questions. I think just to take the last one about the central complaints register, obviously there's a difference between a policy and a process, and we do have a central complaints register as part of the council operations. For the remaining,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Could we make reference within the policy then that should be recorded in the central register, because there's no requirement to do so within the policy?
We can certainly take that comment on board. Yes, thank you. In terms of the responses to the other questions, I'm just going to pass over to Mrs. Smith to make sure I don't get it wrong. Obviously, as someone that's operating the process.
Absolutely. Good evening, everybody. I think I've got all of the questions down. In terms of how we respond, I think that's a fair critique. I can tell you how it works. We tend to respond in the manner in which the complaint has been received. So more often than not, they will come through by telephone, in which case, certainly at the informal stage 1, we would try and answer that inquiry there and then. or have somebody speak to the resident by phone and close the inquiry down. If that's not achievable, then we would ask, would you like to receive a response by email, which is generally the preferred route, or by letter. We take the same approach to a degree at stages 2 and even at stage 3 if required. So I can certainly put it into the policies along those lines. It doesn't have to be in writing per se, but generally it's by email. Very few people want a letter. I don't remember the last time I sent a letter, but by email or by telephone or the email to follow up what's been discussed. But I can put something in the policy to that effect. In terms of the 10 days, if we cannot achieve the 10 days, and we would by experience really know that from the outset, we manage that customer's expectation there and then to say we have a 10-day standard and we aspire to meet that 10-day standard. If it isn't possible, then we will let them know that, and we actually follow that up by what we call a holding response every few days, just to say this is the stage we're at. So I'm happy if everybody wants me to extend it, but our rationale at the beginning was that we wanted to keep the 10 days or whatever the standard was. In this case, it's 10 days. We wanted to make that the same across stages 1, 2, and 3. And in the high 90%, we achieve that. So it's not a major issue. It hasn't been so far. I'm very happy to look at it, but that was the rationale why it stood at that time. Central register we've covered. We do have a central register for both complaints and for vexatious complainants. I take the complaint or vexatious complaint report to CMT quarterly, and I report locally to line manager. It could be daily or it could be monthly in one-to-ones. But certainly it does only go to scrutiny annually. I can add the counsellor being involved on the complaint side if that is what was required. Certainly happy to look at that. The idea on the vexatious report was really that was probably more of a requirement that people had felt it necessary. Very rarely have that on the complaint side, but again, I'm very open to it. Not a problem from my perspective. That leaves me with social media. Get very few complaints through social media. I have people complaining that something hasn't been done when they thought it should have been done, but it rarely meets the standard of a formal stage 1, 2, or 3 complaint. But if that ever had happened, and I can remember one occasion, and that was us really being more proactive than it actually having been stated as a complaint, and that is that the comms team would notify the complaints team and we would pick it up from there. But I can make reference to that. But again, that's more of our process than it is the policy itself.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wheeler, do you want to?
I was going to say, yeah, if I could just come back, I worry about us for exactly the points that you've just made. I worry about us accepting complaints by social media, and I wonder if by that it's sort of a slightly historical thing, and it's something that comes into us because we use a lot of Facebook pages and things, for example, for our communication. And actually, I would expect us and our comms team to almost be closing that down to saying, no, we accept this, please contact us, rather than us actually registering a complaint by social media. It's just something to consider. I just think it's slightly dangerous to have that out there as a method by which we taking complaints. And thank you very much for the rest of your comments. That's incredibly reassuring. I am sorry, there was actually something else that I missed out earlier, and that was we've got no reference. We talk about meetings, we talk about meetings in person, we talk about meetings in the community, we talk about meetings with people. This is under the vexatious complaints in other areas. We don't talk in there at all about online channels. And I wonder if maybe that again is just an historical thing that we've not picked up on before and not updated, but we don't talk about Teams or Zoom meetings, which may well be, more practical and more reasonable generally.
To add that if that's required.
Well, it's not my decision, but
Yeah.
it might be something the executive wants to consider. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor McIntyre, do you wish to add anything?
No, thank you for those challenges, and we'll take them away and make and review them and see what we will include. That's been really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Rise.
Thank you, Chair. I completely accept Councillor Wheeler's point with regards to including councillors within the complaints process. I think we need to be mindful that sometimes councillors don't need to be involved. I think it's very important that the policy is clear that only when and if it's deemed necessary that the councillor is made aware from the complaints team. Obviously, if a resident has gone to their councillor, that's a very different matter. But I think I would be hesitant to put into the policy that the councillor is informed no matter what, because it's not always appropriate. So that's the comment I was just going to make regarding that point. Thank you.
Anybody else? No. Sorry? Councillor Quinn, please.
So I was just looking at the complaints procedure. I was wondering if there should be a direct way to complain through your councillor, whether a councillor can refer your complaint on, because it doesn't say there's a route to do that on the report.
Councillor McIntyre, do you want to comment on that, or shall we
Yes,
go to Ms. Smith?
It's certainly something that we would be open to. It doesn't say you can't do that either. So I suppose by exclusion, or not by excluding it, it's a route in. But let's take that away and have a look to see how we can make that work. We've got to obviously be mindful of making sure that councillors are making complaints on behalf of their residents when they're meant to be making on behalf of residents. What we can't have is the ability for a councillor to make a complaint on behalf of someone without actually having the authority to do so. So we just need to be mindful of that.
Okay, thank you. We have before us a couple of... Sorry, Councillor Wheeler.
I was just going to reassure Councillor Quinn that most residents, if they wish a councillor to make a complaint with them or to support them on the complaint, do generally manage to find us. I don't think it's restricted just to mine, but I do think it would be helpful, given that is a policy that is on our website that residents may well go to give them the option that they could liaise via their local councillor, who sort of may be somebody who is a little bit more tactile, for want of a better word, than a body. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We have two resolutions before us. I suggest that we have made a note, I'm sure, of the points which have been made, and they will be considered by the portfolio holder and the relevant officers. Subject to those, are we happy to accept the two resolutions, 1 and 2? They're quite short, so I'll read them out. The revised complaints and compliments policy as set out at Annex A to this report be agreed, and that it take effect from 1st of June 2023. And secondly, the revised unreasonably persistent and vexatious communication and complaints UPVC policy and procedure as set out at Annex B to this report be agreed, and that it will take effect from the 1st of June 2023. Is everybody happy to approve that? That is agreed then. Thank you. We now come to the safeguarding policy, which is item 6 on the agenda. And I believe Councillor Lisa Fine-and-Cook is going to deal with this for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Various pieces of legislation, namely the Children Acts of 1989 and 2014 and the Care Act of 2014, place an overarching responsibility on Surrey County Council as lead authority for safeguarding within the county. The legislation also places a statutory duty on various agencies, including Surrey Heath, to make arrangements to ensure that we discharge our obligations to safeguard and promote the welfare of children and adults. Safeguarding the most vulnerable in our society is surely one of our most important responsibilities. The policy in front of you in Annex A has been developed to complement and support the multi-agency procedures produced by the Surrey Safeguarding Children Partnership and Surrey Safeguarding Adults Board. Safeguarding aims to prevent harm and reduce the risk of abuse or neglect, to stop abuse or neglect wherever possible, to prevent impairment of development and enable individuals to have the best outcomes, to safeguard individuals in such a way that supports them in making choices and having control over how they want to live, to promote an approach that concentrates on improving life for the individual, to raise public awareness so that communities as a whole, alongside professionals, play their part in preventing, identifying and responding to abuse and neglect, to provide accessible information and support to help people understand what constitutes abuse and neglect and how to respond, to address what has caused the abuse and neglect. The policy has gone before the Joint Staff Consultative Group and Employment Committee earlier this year for review. Most recently, in my duty as portfolio holder for housing, safeguarding and support, I reviewed the policy. It has been produced to a very high standard, and my only proposed changes were minor amendments which have been encompassed within the policy before you. This is an inward-facing policy. It is designed to support our officers in reporting safeguarding concerns. The Council has a lead officer for safeguarding, supported by a network of experienced safeguarding champions who represent all of the Council's service areas. Safeguarding training for staff is mandatory and provided online. Officers who are identified as being more likely to encounter safeguarding concerns, such as frontline staff, are encouraged to undertake additional in-person adult and children's safeguarding training. The recommendation before you is for Executive to resolve that the safeguarding policy and procedure in Annex A be adopted. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Members of the Executive, any questions? No? And members online? I'll take that as a no then. Fine. Good. As Councillor Fine and Cook has pointed out, the resolution is very straightforward. To resolve that the revised safeguarding policy and procedure as attached to Annex A to this report be adopted. Can we agree that, members? Thank you. That brings us to the end of year performance report, which is item 7. And I'm going to deal with that myself. And I'm going to make 2 initial comments, if I might, or 3 really. The first is that we find ourselves in a difficult position because this report is, of course, retrospective and goes back to a time really when before the existing administration. Normally, too, the report would have gone to the Performance and Finance Committee for their observations before it came to us here on the Executive. The problem has been this year, of course, with the various elections which have taken place, which have rather upset the timetable. So I suggest what we do with this is that we allow the Performance and Finance Committee to look at it after us, but if they have any issues that they want to refer back to us as an Executive, then they'd be in a position to do that, and we'll deal with them at a forthcoming meeting. So hopefully that's an acceptable approach. We apologise to the Performance and Finance Committee for the rather peculiar way of doing it on this occasion, but hopefully they will understand the reasons. So having said all that, the report is before you. if there are questions and queries on this, there will be a certain amount of referring back, I suspect. But anyway, notwithstanding that, do members of the executive have any issues to raise? And does anybody, thank you, and anybody online have any issues? No? Okay, fine. Subject to what I said just now, the executive is advised to note the end of year performance report at Annex A. Is that so noted? Great, thank you. Okay, we now come to the exclusion of press and public. And I now have to read out the necessary hopefully we won't have to read this out too often, but there is a recommendation which is the executive is advised to resolve that under Regulation 4 of the local authorities executive arrangement meetings and access to information, England, Regulations 2012, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the ground that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in the paragraphs of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act as set out below. And item 9, the paragraph in question, is 3, information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. Are we agreed on that, members?